Good evening.
Hello, Adesh.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Just making sure everything is working fine.
Yeah, I think it's clear.
I'll share my screen just in case something goes wrong there.
So for students who are participating in this particular session, a quick introduction, of course, the basic information you already have, but let me also tell you, Adesh is from the pioneering batch of design students. And lot of it that we see today in the design program was actually shaped up by the first 2-3 batches of students. In fact, when we started the design program back in 2002, we were just 4 faculty members, and we did not even have a building of our own. And we had 10 students in the first batch. Adesh was, of course, one of them. And so there were initial teething problems, like it happens with any new initiative. And design back in 2002 was not kind of a subject which was really very, not many institutes offered it. Even industry was not very clear at that point of time. But then, yeah, we really had a great time building it up together. So Adesh, welcome to this particular talk show. And please go ahead. You can start.
All right. Thank you. Just some housekeeping stuff. Do you see my screen all right?
Yes, the screen is visible.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Thanks for a nice introduction, Satyaki sir, and thanks Mrityunjay for organizing such a great series. I did manage to see the previous session, pretty useful. And the way I kind of thought about this session, of course, there's a different kind of audience, but my focus is always about making sure the new designers who are just stepping into the design field and may not have any major or prior experience in building products for consumers, how to think differently. And of course, we always advocate that design is not just a skill, it's a mindset, it's how you think. So my presentation is geared towards the new students who just joined, and of course, you're working and studying from home, it's even more difficult. And also students who are just graduating and stepping into the real world. So I'm going to share my learning, my last 16 to 18 years worth of journey, less on the work I have done, but more about what I have learned as a human being, as a designer, as a professional. So with that, let me just start and let me formally introduce you. Maybe this picture give you a better impression how I look like if you're not seeing me on camera right now. So essentially at this point, I live with my family in Florida, USA, working as a director of products for this company called UKG. We just got a new brand. It's called Ultimate Software. It's a 30-year-old company in the HR software space. My focus has been always about design thinking. And this is really the first subject we studied at IIT Kanpur. Dr. Prashant Kumar, Dr. Satyaki, Dr. Amit Ray, they all kind of came together to curate this program. And I can tell you that even now, after so many years, the fundamentals still are valid. I also focus on strategy for the product design innovation. At the same time, user advocacy is always close to my heart. We can never design a system without thinking about our users. And of course, as part of my other curricular activities, I keep engaged myself with the Educational Institute and currently lead a team of 20 product managers and designers at UKG. And if you look at my journey, both professional and academic, started with my Bachelor's of Technology in Computer Science way back in '98. Joined IIT Kanpur design program 2002. That's where the first program which was started. And right after graduating from IIT Kanpur, I joined Coansys, which got acquired by Oracle. Really, that was the first time I started working as a designer, and really was able to apply my design thinking or started learning about the real world. The move to Yahoo, stayed there 4 years. In between, just tried to brush up my management skills. So went to IIM Bangalore for a year as a part-time program, and then moved to US to work for Ultimate Software. And since then, I'm here and still enjoying my stay here. All right, so what to expect in this session? So first thing I want to really talk about, and this is not, I'm not going to spend too much time, but really just to give a view that a lot has changed and design is getting the well-deserved recognition it always supposed to be. And it is getting a lot of traction, and I will touch upon that, why and how that happened so far. I also want to talk about the designing is not just for the sake of solving one specific problem. When you go in the real world, you also have to think about business, meaning any good design should translate into a good business. It doesn't have to be $1 billion worth of enterprise you want to build. But at the same time, you need to make sure that any organization, either you're working for or running your own organization, you need to make sure that you are on the path to profitability, and that you cannot ignore. But this is the last portion, is the portion I will spend most time on. This is more about what skills or competencies do you need to be successful in the field of design. And to me, that is the most important takeaway you can have from this session with regards to when you step into your first job or any kind of entrepreneurship you might do. If you ignore these skills, it's very hard to survive in this fierce competitive world. And I will touch upon what those core skills are, and hopefully you will take away something good. So let's start with a little bit of a history. And I just try to use a lot of these examples which are familiar to you. So when you think about process of innovation, and this has been happening for past 100 years. And the way it works right now, and you will make sense once I start building up my slide. Normally, when you think about building a business or providing a value, the first thing comes to your mind, is there an opportunity? Is there a need you need to fulfill? And once you have that need, a lot of folks who are capable to build a business or an enterprise would jump to this opportunity, and they immediately come up with an idea. And that's really the most common scenario we have seen. You see an opportunity, and the fastest path to execute it is to think of an idea and just implement it. In this example, as you can see, that the need is to transport from point A to point B. And just that value itself is high for many folks, especially in rural areas. But at the same time, when you try to solve the problem by bringing in at least a bus, which can accommodate more people and have safety, some way to, if it rains, you can at least secure yourself. And you can see there's still a demand. Not only people are sitting inside, they're willing to go up on the top of the bus. And that still shows that there's a demand, but that still doesn't talk about the user experience. It purely talks about a transactional value. It talks about the basic need you need to fulfill. But still works, right? And then when you think that the demand has been fulfilled, there is an idea which kind of works, and you think about scaling. And you add, say, more buses, and you try to run the business. But eventually, you will face competition. You will realize that your competition has a way better methods or techniques or offerings and services to provide you a better service at the same price point. And that's where you start reacting to the competition and start refining your own designs or own services, right? But if you think about this, it took almost 50 years to get here. Those who were born in 70s or 80s would conquer that. This experience of transport pretty much remained the same for past 50 years. But until recently, when we started seeing the Volvo buses coming into India and the Tata Motors responded by coming up with similar competitive design, there was an immense pressure to get there. And that's where the innovation happened. But still, there's a problem with this model I'm going to touch upon. So the primary issue with this model is the business mindset came first. There's nothing wrong in there, but there's a challenge. Then you came up with a solution. And finally, you thought about, oh, there are users who are going to use it. What can I do for them? And this is usually the last mindset in most of the industrial innovations we have seen in India and even globally, right? It does work until somebody comes and try to disrupt the market and completely flips the model, which really is all about, you don't really try to think about making money in the first go. You think about your customer. You come up with the right solution which work for that customer, and then you will eventually make business. And there are like tremendous number of examples I can quote right now. I have few in this session, but as you can see, the modern world of technology innovation, investors invest money not to make profit in first 5 years. They really want to build their user base, make sure their value has been tested. And once they can validation from the market, at that point, they can expect the money. And that's really the most probable case where they can grow their business because they know they have built the right product, they're solving the right problem, and they have the right users using it. So one example I want to quote and specifically narrow down to Uber, because it's not just the Uber as a taxi service. This concept got embraced by many of the services. So if you look at the traditional experience of hiring a taxi, it's still pretty prominent in Mumbai. But right now, if you look at hiring a taxi was a nightmare. I lived in a small town, and then if you have to go to a bigger city, you have to literally hunt for taxis, and then it's up to them to quote an amount. And it's really you are at their mercy to get to point A to point B. And then Uber came, and they initially were not profitable, and I don't believe they're still quite profitable after, I would say, 9 to 10 years of existence. But their thought process was, they thought about the rider experience, the challenges most of the riders face. There's no car ownership, and at the same time, there's a demand. On the other side, there are so many people who actually have a car, but they're not using it, they're just parking it 90% of the time, and they wanted to use that and try to make some money. And the way Uber thought about is to connect these two worlds. But the first thought was really understand the pain points of the riders and also the pain points of drivers, because there's so many drivers, despite of having a taxi, they were not making enough money because they were not getting the right kind of demand or right kind of people were not able to reach them because there was no system in place to connect the users and the producers, right? So the same concept got so popular that it basically became a norm in many other industries. You can easily say that I have an Uber of books, I have an Uber of food delivery, I have an Uber of renting my place, but that concept kind of remains the same. And one of the success stories which really came from India is Oyo hotels. And if you remember, one of the challenge with Oyo hotels, well, before Oyo hotels came into existence was you want to travel to a new city, and most of the time you either rely on the fake reviews online, but there is no set expectation or pattern you can observe when you land in a city that you will get a more of a predictable experience to go in a hotel. And Oyo really solved that problem by assuring you that no matter which hotel you go to, if it is Oyo brand, you are going to get the baseline service, which is hygiene, good safety, security, right kind of food. And if you can pay for that extra, people will jump at that opportunity. So really, this all starts from understanding your users and how you can translate that understanding into a product and a service. So what is happening now? And this is kind of a very common simplified view of how multiple industries are approaching building new value services for their consumers and new prospects. And really, if you think about, this is a very common flow, and we actually learned a similar kind of an approach when I was in IIT Kanpur. And this is my own view, and I apply this consistently in my own work nowadays. So what happens here is the first part of this process is not to solve the problem, because that's the worst thing you can do. It's really to find the right problem. Are you really solving the right problem? I have seen so many cases, even in the design and product space, where somebody had a great idea and they invested millions of dollars, excuse me, and they built a product which nobody wanted. They just had a hypothesis that this might work. So really the first part is to really making sure your problem is right. And that starts with your process of divergence, meaning you come up with multiple data points by talking to so many users to really narrow down that, do you really understand the problem, right? And then you narrow down to one specific set of problems or handful of problems which you need to solve for, and make sure that you're not dealing with 10 different problems, you're solving one very strong problem. And if you can get there, that's the holy grail of everything. And next phase is about real solution. That's where you can assure yourself that now that you're solving the right problem, what different ideas might exist or coexist. At that point, you bring in different methods like brainstorming or focus groups with the users to really start coming up with broad array of different solutions. And then you kind of go back again by the process of elimination, you try to narrow down to the one most viable solution, which kind of works. And then you kind of keep reiterating on that. So this is a very simplified view. There's a more to it in terms of how the process could differ in different industries. But just wanted to provide you that the problem definition is the most important thing in the design process. Now, let's talk about the good design is actually good business. And what I mean by that, if you have a good design out there, users will happily pay for it. And if you are running your own organization or you're responsible for building or growing an organization, you have to think about money. So one example which always excites me is the smartwatches. And I just gave an example of Apple Watch because this is the most valuable watch in the world right now. But the day this was launched, people thought it's just a gimmick. It will never replace the traditional art of watchmaking, which is still true, it's still a premium market. But Apple defied the whole notion, and in just 5 to 6 years of existence, Apple Watch, number of sales they had, the amount of money it has made, has already surpassed the combined sales of all the premium watchmakers in the world. And I'm talking about the premium, the Rolex watch of the world, right? That kind of talks about why people paid extra premium to a good design, because this was designed to keep the users in mind. If you're an Apple Watch user, you would know that there are so many hidden features like fall detection. If some elder person is suddenly, experiencing, some health issues, watch can tell you, and it has saved countless lives. And people generally feel that paying $400 for an Apple Watch is actually not a bad deal if you can afford it, right? And there are some more affordable versions. Now, this is another example which I personally like is Honda Activa. This is the #1 scooter currently being sold in India. And the reason this became so popular, and if you remember before Honda Activa, there were like two really good segments. One is the motorbike segment, and there's a traditional, the scooter offered by Bajaj, which is only appeal to the male users. Honda Activa really blurred the lines between male and the female, young and adult and the old. It really kind of shows a form factor which is appealing to every kind of demographic, but also retains the traditional value of why even the Bajaj Chetak was so famous, mainly because of the storage in the front and the flexibility you have to store a lot of items in the scooter. Actually made it more valuable, and people were not shy to pay more for this kind of a vehicle because it kind of works. So the sales for Honda Activa was so great that it basically became like a base standard in the entire country, which was very rare. And it only happened after 80s when the Bajaj Chetak and the Bajaj Super were the main scooters. So let's talk about the future, how future is embracing design. One of the example I can tell you is if you watch the SpaceX recent launch, the Dragon capsule. This is one of the first private companies who ventured in the space of providing supplies to International Space Station. And if you look at, America has been sending the supplies to International Space Station for past 20, 30 years, right? But the design of the spacesuit and the interiors have never changed. So when Elon Musk came and he said, why can't I challenge that? He literally took away all the panels and the buttons from the interiors, and he focused on the most important information the astronauts would like to see. And he started thinking about the user experience, both from the interface, the seats, even the spacesuit you would see is so trimmed down, it actually looks like something from science fiction movie. And that's really, is a testament that if the space tourism or the space technology can embrace design, everything else can. And that's where people are getting inspiration from this experiment, that if you think about design, it actually makes good business. And why this is a good business for Elon Musk? Because he drastically cut down the payload cost by 1/10. And everyone is jumping on this opportunity to just use SpaceX to go up and send the supplies. And similarly, if you look at the modern technologies, voice space interactions, personal assistants, is really paving the way for how the user interfaces would look in the future. And I can guarantee that in next 10 years, the dependence on a screen will go away drastically, and you will have a natural conversation with devices. So think about that. Like, even if you're trying to think about the UI as a career option, you have to think about things which are beyond the UI, which is all about like a augmented reality space interactions, voice-based interaction. And Elon Musk is actually testing the experiment. He's doing an experiment where you can tap your thoughts, and using your thoughts, you can control the UI. And I'm not going to go there because I don't understand how that's even possible right now. All right, so with that, I just wanted to make sure the future is not going to wait for you. It's going to come, and whether you're ready or not. But the good news is you can easily prepare yourself for this wave which is coming. And things are moving so fast that every year the curve on the technology maturity and the technology adoption goes high. My goal here is to provide you the core competencies which never fades. And regardless of what tool, technology, or the discipline you choose, it's going to be the same for all. So my next section is really about what core competencies a designer or even a professional, whether they're an engineer, they're a business person, they're a project manager, it doesn't matter. If you are running a business, you have to have a demand, you have to have your team members you work with, and you have to have a way to make money. So I kind of narrowed down to three main competencies, and there could be, if you look at key competencies for designers, you will find at least 50 to 60 competencies. But my goal here is to introduce three competencies which are core. And if you ignore these, then there's a problem. So let's start with the user empathy. It's not sympathy, it's empathy. Sympathy means when you see someone struggling and you try to give them or console them by saying everything's going to be all right. That's sympathy. You may not understand what they're going through, but you have a good intention to sympathize with them. This is not exactly the same. Empathy is really when you try to think like the user, really understand their pain points, even if they're not saying much, but you have at least a way or intention to understand what they're going through. It could be almost like if you're designing something for a person who is on a wheelchair, you can never design a product for a person on a wheelchair unless you experience yourself being on a wheelchair. And doesn't mean you have to break your leg. It simply means just tie your leg, sit on a wheelchair, and see how much effort it takes for you to move the wheels with your hand, and you will realize the pain they go through. If somebody, nowadays it's pretty common that the parents are working from home, their kids are at home, and they are really struggling to pay attention to their kids and also to their work. And if you really talk to a lot of parents, they will literally on the verge of crying. And that's where, if you're designing a solution for them and you're not a parent, you need to really think about how they feel about that. The next part is collaboration. Now, this is a really important subject I want to bring in. And again, I have seen this notion that most of the creative people who reach the pinnacle of their success realize that you don't always have all the answers with you. The only way you can get the right answer if you collaborate well with multiple folks in your organization, but you don't have all the answer. So when you think about your design being the best, it's not always the case. You can actually fall flat if you just think that way, that my design, the first idea came to my mind is the right design. It's actually a pretty wrong direction you might take. And finally, value mindset is very important. Everything you build, you have to think about whether users will see any value in it, whether your organization will make money out of it. And if you have these two things not carved out, your designs or your business will eventually fade away. And I will talk about some examples in the next couple of minutes. So each competency plays a critical role. So let's start with the user empathy. Now, this is where if you're in a business or you're responsible for taking care of your customers, the first thing you have to apply is empathy to your customers. I mean, you can debate that you can apply empathy anywhere, but this really starts with customers. And this could be customers or could be prospects you're trying to sell. They're not yet your customers, but they are really your market you are after. So if you apply empathy, understand your customers really well, you know that you're on the right path. And that's where the core skill is so core to me personally, because we have made mistakes. I've made mistakes in the past where I thought my idea was the best. I even convinced my leadership, and we rolled out a product in the market which completely failed. And the missing piece was we were focusing on the wrong audience, and we literally thought that a research paper published by somebody is good enough. And I never spoke to the user, right? So lesson learned. So that's where empathy is really, really important. The next part is stakeholders. You can never be the only one in the room to call the shots. You have to be someone who is an enabler. You have to be someone who can bring multiple ideas, encourage the conversation, and make sure that all the people who are responsible to build the product in some form and shape has the voice in the process. So this is really about, so if you're a designer, you will be working with engineers, you'll be working with product managers, marketing people, and you'll be working with legal teams in your organization. Everyone has some great ideas, but if you don't listen to them, you will always miss out something critical element, which is a value in the product. And finally, the business. Now, these are the people who are only responsible for revenues, profit margins, and making sure your profitability is on the right path. So in terms of value, you have to always think about, if I launch this product, will my company grow by 10% in terms of overall valuation or the revenue generation? At the same time, you have to think about whether users who will buy your product, will they pay enough? Because there are a lot of freeloaders, they would want your service and don't want to pay for it, which is fine. But those businesses don't survive for long unless you have a way to make money out of it. So let's peel this further, and I'll give some examples and some of the work I've done in the past. So this is one project which will highlight the need for empathy and how empathy actually worked and saved some lives. This is one project I did completely as a volunteer, did not get paid for this, but gave me the most satisfaction. We did a research in Harvard. It's a pretty small city in Maharashtra, and at the border of Maharashtra and Karnataka, really. So one of the things which we were trying to accomplish here was to really understand there were so many villages where people were struggling to get medicines on time, especially the cold chain wasn't available. And in those towns, people were simply dying just because the medicines didn't arrive on time. It's not that there wasn't enough supply. Supply was there, but nobody in this village knew at what point they need to order certain medicine, because they need to keep those medicine at a certain temperature. And because of that, they were just simply avoiding getting those medicines who would just expire in a few days if you don't give it or sell it to someone. So I jumped on this project just to do some user research and ethnographic study in the villages. One of the things we learned that everyone in the village was willing to adopt the new ways of doing things. They did not have a technology adoption, meaning they were still using the Nokia phones and dependent on SMS-based communication. And the medicine shops in the villages were not equipped to do or afford the modern software which can do the inventory planning. They just simply were buying medicine based on their hunch. And every time they order the medicine, they get the first order in 7 days. And many a times the critical medicines were not arriving in time. So one of the things which we learned when we talked to the users, we literally went to villages and spoke to the women out there, the old people out there, and they were all ready to jump and adopt technology. And we found their resistance to use mobile phones and enter their values. But eventually we came up with a simple way to start gathering a lot of data And this data was used by one of our, the founder of this initiative is from MIT. He actually relocated from US to India, and he built a pretty comprehensive data engine behind it to really understand how this data is being used. And he created small hubs in the multiple part of Maharashtra to really make sure that based on your inventory, the system automatically sends you the medicine based on what they feel are the missing elements in your local shop. And this project actually got funding from the Gates Foundation and World Health Organization. And right now, this is a profit-making entity. And I'm not associated with this anymore, but I'm very happy to say that this project alone made the medicine supplies, which were initially taking 7 to 8 days, people were getting medicine in advance, just in anticipation that something might go wrong. So this is one example where empathizing with the user can lead to a great solution. So how do you build empathy? And this is really important for us to understand. The first thing we need to make sure that as designers, as professionals, we need to remove our biases. It doesn't matter what person or the other person believe in, what their opinions are. You have to listen. Make sure that you don't go in with a bias saying that a person from South Africa may not be a good engineer, but that on contrary, South Africa is a great talent. There are so many students out there who drop out of colleges, but they are really good in programming. So there are many examples. You might even think about, women cannot do certain things and their opinion doesn't matter. It's just insane that you even think about that. So removing the bias is the first step. And active listening. This is not just you're listening by closing your eyes. This is really about reading between the lines. When you talk to the users or customers, they usually come and tell you the solution, but you really are looking for the core pain points they have, which they're not saying immediately. And that's where, when you think about active listening, you ask right questions. And the third part of the empathy is really focusing on the core issue. Don't just take what users say by the face value or literally. There are many areas where users just don't express themselves well, excuse me, and they just are facing a severe problem. They're not just saying it. And it's your job as a designer to really dig that out of them, really by understanding what they feel about that. So removing bias, active listening, and seeking the core issue. If you can master these three things, you will build a great empathy. Excuse me. Now let's talk about the collaboration. Now this is another project which I did. So what happened in this project? There was if you guys are aware, you open a website, you see an ad, right? And most of the ads are targeted to you because of your geography, your gender, your buying history, and all that. Nowadays, it's very pervasive, so it's actually not that great. But way back in 2009, it was more about how do we help users to show them the right products which they really need. But internally, if you look at how the ad approval process works for big companies like Yahoo's and AOL, if a designer is designing a small ad unit, just to get an approval on the ad unit from other stakeholders in different parts of the world, they used to take 3 weeks to get a final approval. And if you have to make a small change, it takes another 3 weeks to get the approval. And designers were working days and nights just to deliver something fast. And it was a big platform which Yahoo at some point used. So I took this as a challenge to really understand what's going on. So my first step was to map existing flow, how multiple players interact with each other. And then when we did this flow in collaboration with all the parties who were involved, we found that there were way too many red lines here, which means there are too many talks happening, too many handshakes happening, but the actual needle was not moving. So in order for us to get to the right solution, the first thing which I did with my friend Shashank here, we traveled to 7 different locations in 7 different days. I mean, all the way from US to Taiwan to Hong Kong, India, Mumbai, Singapore. We literally were just sleeping on the flights and staying in hotels with a briefcase and a backpack. But we gathered a lot of data, and we met with the actual end users who were using this system to collaborate with each other. And we found that it was actually a simple problem to solve. So we came back and we came up with a simplified flow where we removed all the noise which was happening here. And we came up with a very simple interaction, almost like a like a Slack kind of interface where everyone is on the same page. Designer shows the design, all the people get the message at the same time, and they like it or hate it, or they provide feedback, and designers immediately go back and fix it. And we were able to reduce the time, which used to take 3 weeks to get a single approval, into no more than 3 hours. And it drastically improved the company's profitability, mainly because you're not wasting countless hours in doing that. Now, if you look at collaboration, I mean, it's a pretty broad term, and everyone can claim that they are a good collaborator. But my thought process is, if you look at these 3 main traits, if you can master these, you will always have a successful collaboration. So again, going back, if you are in a meeting and you are on a project collaborating with multiple people, don't focus on the people or their emotion or their personalities, focus on the core problem at hand. Even if somebody has hyper reaction to a certain comment they made, doesn't matter. It's really the problem you are trying to solve. If you're not focusing on that, then you will completely derail the conversation and you will actually lose the credibility in the company. Another thing is diverse views. And this is where it's important for us to understand that everyone who is part of the conversation brings some value to the table, even if the final direction may not align with what everyone said, but making sure that everyone's voice is heard. Doesn't matter what their number of years of experience is, doesn't matter how old they are. It's really all about everyone has experienced something different in their life, which you have not, meaning making sure that that is on the table, right? And the last part about a good collaboration is keeping your emotions aside and focus more on data. And I've seen, and you probably have seen numerous times where one person just gets hyper in a meeting and say, I want to do it because I feel like this, feel like doing this, or I have seen this numerous times, so just trust me. It's fine. You may have enough credibility for people to trust you, but if you bring data to the conversation, it makes it a whole lot better. And if you think about, I mean, the graph I showed here is the latest pandemic going on, and you can say that all the countries who did not intervene early enough have seen a huge spike. And countries like New Zealand, Australia, they took care of the precautions early enough, and their curve was completely different. So if you use this data and try to have an argument, nobody can defy because you have the hard facts in front of you. So again, bring more data and less emotions will make your collaboration even better. So let's talk about the product value, how to think about value. One of the example, I specifically quoted this example from the piracy, duration we have all gone through. There was a time where everybody loved free content. Even I'm guilty of doing that as well. Nobody wants to pay for a movie on YouTube or somewhere else. And for a very long time, most of the content houses were trying to prevent or secure their content. And even in the cinema hall, they were having security to make sure you're not sneaking in a camera and record the video. And eventually, if you get to access a movie, it's really poor quality. People are talking in the cinema hall and you're watching a movie, not a good experience. It is very slow. Doesn't matter how fast your internet is. If the core server is slow, you would experience the buffering. And most of you probably will connect with that a 1 hour movie took 4 hours because it wasn't loading correctly. And the worst, which I hate the most, is these pop-up ads, which just, you can't control these, right? So all in all, people struggle with that, but it was free. So you can still say, well, I'm not paying for it, but I can live with that. But when you look at what happened in the content industry, the content producers are losing millions of dollars just because people were not ready to pay. And if you remember, it's not just the lead actors who get paid. There's a whole livelihood of people who support the movie making process. They need to get paid. To compensate for the losses, most of these production houses started kind of creating content which are less quality. You can quickly make it and not expect too many losses. So the content quality also suffered greatly. And then came the video on demand platforms. And this is where the Netflix of the world, Amazon Prime, they basically said, if there is a demand for good content and you provide an easy way to get access, users will pay for it. And they also challenge the content players that if you just rely on publishing your content or providing in cinema halls, and that's the only way you can think about your business, it's not going to scale. So they thought about connecting these two worlds, and the outcome was that you now have access to really high quality content, both literally and metaphorically, meaning you have 4K videos and you also have great actors coming up with great content. You have more choices. It's not like you're struggling to just pick one. You have more content than you can finish in an entire life right now. But the best part is easy access. If you buy a smart TV now, you have easy access to just get there and start watching movie and not worry about any kind of ads or interruptions or buffering or loading. You're actually saving a lot of time. And I can vouch that if India India can become a market which can pay for the content, it's the best example I can quote. America was always like people paid for the content. In India, it was not like that. But nowadays, even if it's like $500 a month or even 500 rupees a month or 100 rupees a month, people are paying for the content because they know they're getting a whole lot value out of it. So making sure when you think about a product, your product has to generate the value good enough that users will pay for. So let me break it down for you in the next slide. So when you think about value, how do you really think about the end game, which can generate the right value? So again, narrowing down to three main traits or three main tenets of value creation. The first is user satisfaction. If you just have an hypothesis that users will buy it, doesn't mean they bought it. Are they even happy using it? Because if they're not happy using it, they will eventually go for a competition and they will stop paying you. So the journey never stops. Every 6 months, you have to go back to the users, understand whether your current product offerings are making any sense. Are they even using it? There are many people who just use it, and they hate it, but they have no other option, so they keep living in the pain. But the moment a competitive offering comes in the market, they immediately make a jump, and you see a decline in your revenues. So making sure that you're constantly measuring the user satisfaction. There's so many tools, which is not part of this conversation, but really there are industries where, whether it's a service industry or a product industry, measuring the user satisfaction every 6 months is a standard. It's called NPS, the Net Promoter Score, is another is like one of the strong metrics, but there are a whole lot of metrics you can measure. The other test, or the litmus test, whether you're generating value, is whether somebody is willing to pay for your content. It's fine that you might build a service where nobody's paying for it, but advertisers are somehow paying for it, but somebody is paying. It's not something you are running a charity. Somebody is willing to pay for the service you are providing. So if you think about any kind of a product which users would use and they say, you know, I can actually easily pay 50 rupees a month because this service adds value to me, it's a good test, right? But if you think about a product and a service where there's no hope to get users to pay for it, but there might be hope for you to grow the base of users, it's still a very tricky situation to be in, because you're not going to get funding from investors if you can't show them that users will eventually pay for that or not. And finally, when you think about paths to profitability, now this is very important. You may have users who are willing to pay for your product or service, but that may not be enough for your organization to afloat the water or stay in the business. You may have a wrong price point on a product, which essentially does not cover the cost of your operations. So that becomes a problem. So when you think about path of profitability, there are many ways. You can either increase the price, but at the same time increase the value for the users, or you create different segments where you have the premium users paying more and they are getting more. And then you have a bigger a pie of the user base, which is paying less, but they are getting less, right? Or you can think about taking your business or your solution in multiple geographies where suddenly you're scaling your offering to a bigger number of users, and tapping into the untapped market in different regions can make your path to profitability more promising, right? So either way, if you are in the position of design and you're only thinking about users and not thinking about your business, even if you're not responsible for business, you still should be asking the right questions to your product managers, to your business leaders, and making sure that they are eventually going to make money off your solution or not. Now, you might challenge me on that, saying that, well, do we need to think about money all the time? So think about this way, even if you're building a solution for social good, even the social enterprises need money to at least survive. So in that case, it's not paths to profitability, it's just paths for survival. So you still have to make sure that you're getting enough value to survive in the market. So with that, I'm actually going to close my presentation and open up for question, but I just want to kind of leave with this thought I had. So design is not just a skill, it's how you think, how you perceive your real world. And it requires a deep empathy to make sure that you understand real people and their problems they face on a day-to-day basis. And really, it requires a truly unbiased approach to arrive at some useful solutions. If you can take away, these competencies which I just introduced, I can guarantee that your introduction in the design professional life will be pretty amazing. And that's where I conclude my session. Thanks a lot, and open up for any questions.
Thanks, Adesh. It was a wonderful presentation and very appropriate examples that you had picked in. And also, I think you addressed some of the most crucial issues that at least the students in design who just kind of stepped into this particular world of design need to understand it. Thank you very much. It was a lovely presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, now it's open to questions.
Yeah, I don't have access to the, hold on, let me just stop sharing first and see if there are any questions in the chat.
Yeah, I think you'll get it in the chat box.
Right. All right, so I'm getting first question here. What was the best
part of being the pioneer batch? Yes, Adesh.
Yeah. Well, I can say initially it was not the best part when we started because we were all trying to figure this out. Dr. Satyaki had a lot more hair at that time. He was young, like most of you. I was young, like most of you. I have gray hair now. But the best part was we were all trying to figure this out together. And everyone had great ideas. But one thing which I can say the best part is because we were all trying to figure out together, there was no hierarchy. We were just very open with each other. We were trying to make sure that we listened to each other's pain points, concern. We had fights, we had disagreements, but eventually the realization was if we can get the basics right, we will be successful, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
so
so
next question
actually,
is,
having a design program in a technology institute has its own pros and cons. While we do try to focus on functionality to a large extent, uh, so we really had hard time explaining to people why both form and functions are important.
right.
And yeah, in fact, I remember when I joined IIT Kanpur, I was 26 years old,
Yep.
and my first batch, two of my MDiS thesis students, one of them was Mohammad Shah, lovingly known as Baba. Baba
Yeah.
was 2 years older than me. He was my first thesis student.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it was a lot of fun actually. In fact, I still remember there was a small little room. It was a small cabin actually in Professor Prashant Kumar's lab, where all the not 10 students but at least 6 students were made to sit together, and they had
right.
just 3 or 4 computers to share. But one thing that I really admired in uh, I still see such students here, but the first 3-4 batches. I mean, these guys, they used to live in the program in the department. They would work for at least, if I'm not wrong, 16 to 18 hours a day, and that's how it used to happen. And the new students, all that I can say is, if just coming to IIT Kanpur will not. I told this in the previous session also. Just coming to IIT Kanpur or a good institution that way doesn't get you a good job or a good future in design. It's just a lot of hard work. That's extremely important. And most of the speakers that you see today as part of these sessions, I've seen them very closely, and I know that they really worked hard to achieve what they have achieved today. And that really, Adesh, I mean, I feel really proud seeing most of you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, one comment I want to make. We used to spend most of our time in the department for two reasons. First of all, we were hungry for work, but also there was air conditioning there, which was not there in our rooms. So that was another motivation for us. I think there's one more question I can see, how to create cost barrier for the products we develop. I think what's being asked here, how do we contain the cost and not grow it too much, if I understand this correctly? So this is one thing I learned in one of my management programs is the cost is a reality and pricing is a strategy. This is one code which remained with me for quite some time. You can see the cost clearly, like you know how many people are going to work on it, how much material you're going to use, what's the market price of your material. You can see the cost, but then you can build something of value and put whatever price you want. I mean, putting a price is always an interesting game where you can buy a craft from a craftsman, and if you can tell a good story, you can sell that for, I can say like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I have seen that happening, and this is really how you kind of think about value creation. But when you think about the cost containment, this is important for us to understand that if you have a mindset of always keeping your work more efficient and not burn the cash given by investors, in the long run, that's going to help. And this is not about being cheap. This is about being more efficient. So small things can help. Like, for example, if you are thinking of experimenting with a material and you just don't know how it's going to turn out, it's preferable to buy smaller samples of multiple material and experiment with one, and then go for a big one. I'll give an example. Like I painted my house, and in US, most of the time you do things yourself. So I tried my hands on it, and I wasn't satisfied on what color do I want to choose. So in shops here, they sell these smaller samples of colors. You can just take home for $1. You can use it and see how it looks, and finally you can buy a full 5-gallon box or a 1-gallon one and paint the whole house. But from a design point of view, this is the same mindset that you think about experimenting more often with smaller sample materials, or if you're building a software, you think about writing a small piece of software to test your inputs and output and see if it's providing you the right value or the right outcome you're desiring before you kind of hire 10 engineers to build a piece of code. So I'm more than happy to provide more guidance, but I think at a high level, I can provide that cost containment should be the first thought. Okay, so the question is, in your top 3 skills, why creativity doesn't feature? Okay, so here's I specifically kept it separate. Creativity is important, and if you didn't see it in my presentation, doesn't mean I don't care about that. Creativity is natural to most people, right? You could be an artist. You could be, someone who is good at cooking, and you are creative there. Creativity is natural to us. You can't build creativity. You can harvest and you can tap. You can discover creativity in you. What I told in this presentation, these are the competencies you really need to translate your creativity into something more meaningful, right? So that's what I can say, that it's really an inherent quality most people have and most people may not have, but it's just a matter of when you discover that, really.
Yeah, just like any other skill, creativity is also something that needs to be nurtured. That's extremely important.
So I think another question is, why did you go for an MBA for IMB and what value did it add to your career? Can we attain same level of knowledge from industry as a B school? Yeah, so my business school experience was more about when I was into the professional career for almost 7 to 8 years. I realized that I didn't quite understand how my designs were being used by the users and how it's making money. And I just got curious about understanding how the business actually works. So I spent 1 year in IIM Bangalore to understand that aspect. And I was actually surprised to see that most of the professors in B schools also think like design faculty. They understand how to sell a product, how to understand the user's psyche and design product for them. They were just not using the design jargons we use in D school, sorry. So it was just my own curiosity. But after I went there, I realized that a lot of B schools are also offering the design thinking courses, and design thinking has become a pretty known discipline. And I can guarantee that eventually in the future, the B schools and the D schools will come together because they are literally all about building the right product for the market. Could you please elaborate on your creative process for solving any problem? All right, so I'll take this quick because I also want to be mindful of everybody's time here. I don't want to take too much here. But the process for solving any problem, again, when I showed you that divergence and convergence graph a couple of minutes back, honestly, that is my process. I start with making sure that if my bosses are asking me to solve a problem, I first question them that, is it the right problem we're solving? We try to get, talk to multiple strategy folks in the company to make sure that everyone recognizes it's one problem we're solving. So is it the user satisfaction is declining? Is it because you rolled out a product but nobody's using it? So we try to narrow down to what the problem is. And once we know what the problem is, at that point, we bring in more people and start getting more and more ideas. And I can tell you, we have a notion that designers can only the one in the room with an idea. It's actually anyone in the room can have an idea. It could be an intern from a technology side can have a great idea. But what value a designer bring to the conversation, they are the enablers, they are the synthesizers. They can make sense of the noise in the room. If you have like 15 different ideas being floated around, as a designer, you can keep your eyes open and really try to gather the common trends or the common themes which are emerging from the conversation, and then try to put it on a piece of paper or a whiteboard. And that's where you can convince the people that now we understand the problem and we have 15 ideas on the table. Maybe we can think about 3 ideas which could actually work. So my process is not a very hardcore process or a constrained process. It evolves, but the basic tenets of the process kind of remains the same, which I showed in my divergence and convergence principle. All right.
I would just like to quickly add something to it, Adesh. I mean, in fact, what happens is when you are actually sitting together on a brainstorming or discussing ideas,
Right.
Ideas do come up from different people who are there, and of course, I mean, if there are, let's say, 10 ideas which have come, you're finally picking up 1 or 2 or 3. That doesn't mean all those 7 ideas have actually been rejected. Yep. It's important to keep those ideas also, because you never know when they're going to be used.
Absolutely.
Maybe for some other project.
It happened. Many times you pick an idea because at that point it made sense. You proceed with the idea and eventually it failed for whatever reason. Then what would you do? You come back to the other set of ideas which you initially did not consider. So it's not a waste. It's actually an asset which you want to keep, right?
Absolutely.
I think I'll take one more question, and I don't think there are more questions coming in. So how much time an organization typically have to be in the introduction phase without any profit? There is no one guidance on this one. It's all about what is the phase of an organization. So for example, if it's a startup and you have a lot of funding and your idea or the problem you're trying to solve made sense, I have seen investors having a patience for up to 5 years before they start making any profit, but that's not very common. Most common timeline I've seen is no more than 3 years before the product starts making money. The 3 years from the launch, meaning you launch a product, you build your market, you start selling it. Don't expect the profit the next morning. Expect the profit maybe 3 years from now. But you do have to expect revenues flowing in, meaning, so of course, if you understand the basic finance, revenue is the total money you make, which comes in the organization. You spend part of that money, which is a cost. And if you just say, if your cost is less than the revenue, then of course you're making profit. But it's okay if your cost is a little bit high, more than revenue, and you're actually making losses, but your idea is so great that investors are willing to put more money in the B or the C rounds of investment. It's fine, because eventually you will make more money. But if you're not generating revenue, it's a problem. If you cannot generate revenue, then essentially investors will pull out. So I can say that 3 to 5 years is a reasonable time to expect any profit, but 1 to 3 years is a good time to make sure you show the revenues.
All right, so that brings us to an end of this session. And of course, students have their have the email IDs, so I'm sure you'll get a couple of mails, Adesh.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you so much for being here. And let's hope to have more such sessions in future. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's Mrityunjay has already created I think a YouTube page where all these talks are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll soon be connecting them to the design website also for more people to see.
Perfect. So thanks,